We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys. Part 5 of this is what if Naruto woke up in a different Konoha. The day after a wild party to celebrate the end of the war against Madara, Naruto, the remaining Konoha 12, and some guests, can't help but wonder what happened last night as they wake up in a different Konoha. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 12. Naruto kept himself a healthy distance away from the rest of the crowded room as he rubbed the hand-shaped bruise marks that were quickly fading from around his neck. The girls hadn't been too happy about their current situation and had no qualms in demonstrating their displeasure. The various other glares and disagreeable dispositions from everyone else said the males were only just holding themselves back. Except for Sai and Gaara, but that was hardly news to anyone. Even Hinata had seen fit to stand out of the way and allow the other more vocal and violent girls to speak for her, when usually she was one to try and calm everyone down. Naruto supposed he couldn't blame her. Hey, so I guess by now most of you have already figured out our situation, right? The sudden spike of killing intent in the room was more than answer enough. Especially the particularly toxic cloud around his two teammates. Sakura was already being restrained by Tenten and Temari, or she'd have been at his throat by now, he was sure. Look, we can fix this. It's not that bad, not that bad. Kiba snarled from the armchair he was sitting in. My own mother may have just killed all possibility of her having grandchildren. Akamaru whined, trying to comfort his partner. Nobody cares about your potentially compromised fertility, Kiba, Ino said, frowning at the young man who was visibly still in pain. I was hit on by own dad. My own dad. Do you have any idea how disgusting that is? Hey, at least your dad didn't try to kill you, after you tried to kill him, Naruto told her. You think that's terrible? I stabbed my own father in the gut, Naruto, Sasuke said in a very low tone of voice. If it hadn't been for Karen, he would have died. Everything's a competition with you, isn't it, team? Sasuke lunged for him. Tsunade kept moving along the pathway quickly, with Shizune in tow. She had no idea what misfortune could happen to her in such a backwater town, but thinking about that winning she had made with her last coin, she presumed that it was going to be pretty bad. It was always like that, with such omens. At least for her. For that reason, she had immediately decided that she wanted to be out of that place as soon as possible. Tsunade-sama, we were on a roll. Shizune protested. Instead of answering, Tsunade kept dragging her apprentice through the crowded streets. We won so much. And you didn't even collect. One of the Senju's eyes twitched at the mention of the lost money, but it didn't matter. She could find more, in another town, with other means if necessary. She couldn't ignore the uneasiness that was seeping into her heart. Something was going to happen. Something big. And soon. What? Wait, what was that? Somebody was following them. Tsunade scanned the crowd around the marked square. She couldn't pinpoint it, but her instinct was not wrong. There was someone on their tail, and he, or they, were close. And it was not a civilian. It was someone who moved like a shinobi. Probably more than one. And they were hiding in the sea of faces around her and the young, way too young, Shizune. She couldn't fight them, not here. And even if there had been no civilians, she could not protect Shizune and focus on the enemies at the same time. Only one option left. Shizune, run. Wah! I said, run. She yelled, breaking into a sprint with her apprentice in tow. The brush trailed on the scroll, swift and fluid but leaving a firm trail. Being a seal master did miracles for one's calligraphy. As the ink dried, the Yondaime Hokage bit his thumb and started to form the necessary hand seals. Kuchios. He yelled, finally slamming his palm on his desk. There was a puff of smoke, and then a small amphibian figure was standing in front of him. A really small one, actually. Smaller than the palm of his hand. It was standing in a strange, exaggerated pose that was somehow rendered more impressive from the smoke. It was probably intended to look fierce, but the diminutive size of the reddish toad was ruining the effect completely. Maybe it was Minato's imagination, but he could have sworn that an orchestra had started playing, and was the room a little darker? Like, dramatically darker. Nobody can see me coming. Nobody can sense me going, the toad proclaimed with a melodramatic tone. Oh no. Not him. Minato almost groaned, but kept a straight face. I am the great Gamatora. Spy Toad Extraordinaire. The little lover of theatrical appearances finished. His introduction was completed by a change of his pose, with a dramatic movement of his arms. Great. It was one of the toads that spent too much time with Jiraiya. Or was it the other way around? Who dares summon me? Who dares? Wait. Aren't you Jiraiya's brat? Yes. I'm his brat, Minato said, gritting his teeth. And I summoned you. Humph. Well, what do you want? The spy asked, crossing his tiny arms. I'm a busy toad, you know. I'm in high demand. High demand. Minato had summoned him only 3 times, and always by accident. Well, you see, Gamatora. I must send a message to Jiraiya-sensei. It's really important, Minato said, trying to sound as polite as he could. The red toad looked disinterestedly at his webbed fingers. Well, if it's that important, I guess I could lend you a hand. Minato inwardly sighed. Even if Gamatora was an incredibly able spy toad, his ego was as great as his skill. If not bigger. He couldn't send away the tiny toad like that, after explaining the task at hand. It would have been extremely rude, and Minato had to treat his summons with respect. Even little egomaniacs like Gamatora. Maybe I should send another messenger, now that I think about it, he mumbled, at a volume high enough to be heard, apparently distracted. He braced for a reaction. What? You dare question my skill? Gamatora thundered in outrage. It was incredible how a being so tiny could raise his voice to such volumes. He probably had plenty of practice, with all the boasts about his stealth skills. The irony was not lost to the yondaime. I don't mean it as an offense, Gamatora-sama, Minato said hurriedly, trying to look embarrassed. He hoped that the honorific would help with the boisterous summon. But you said it yourself, you're a spy toad. Are you sure you'll be able to do something so different from your usual duties? Che. So little faith. Of course I can do it. If I can hide from them, then no one can hide from me. The toad proceeded to attempt an evil laugh, but ended up choking on its own saliva. Minato's sweat dropped, but persisted. Thinking about it, this task is beneath you, Gamatora-sama. I could just try to summon another, less important messenger. Gamatora gasped. You're trying to get rid of me, aren't you? You're trying to steal my work. Well, I'm not letting that happen. I'm not leaving without that message. Great, his idea had backfired and now the toad was being stubborn. Minato sighed, this time for real. There was no way out of it apparently, and he had a lot of other stuff to do. I suppose that if you're so determined, Gamatora-sama, he said, rolling up the scroll and putting it in a safe, cylindrical container. Give me that. The toad's tongue shot out and latched onto the small scroll the moment it was ready for transport. It must be taken to Jiraiya and Orochimaru, as fast as you can, Minato reminded him. Reverse summon to their position, and give them to them immediately. Gamatora's features took on an evil glint. They'll never see me coming. But they're supposed to see you coming. The yondaime protested. Then the toad poofed out of existence. He had probably not heard him, anyway. Minato groaned. At least they would get the message before any real damage could be done. Naruto grunted, choking for air. Like all the times Naruto and Sasuke had fought, there was an escalation and things almost got out of hand. Which was not exactly a good thing in a room full of people, in the middle of a village that had barely started to accept the idea that, no, they were not spies, intruders or assassins. Which was ironic, because they were all ninja. So, of course, all the other people in the room restrained them, either physically or with their trademark techniques more suited for subduing them. At the same time, it was not pleasant. Have you both calmed down? Shikamaru asked, visibly annoyed. Yes, Sasuke and Naruto replied, without averting their eyes from each other. Even if they wanted to, it would have been difficult between the shadows, chakra chains, sand and just sheer strength that was keeping them in their places. Sakura sighed in relief, but didn't let go of Naruto's neck. Now what? Sakura-chan, that. Quiet, you. I don't trust you to not start a fight again as soon as I let go. Apparently Karen was feeling the same way towards her own boyfriend, since Sasuke was still covered in chains. Now, Shikamaru said, we need to decide our next course of action. What do you mean? We fix this, of course. Ino rebuffed. I'm with the blonde chick, Suigetsu snickered, which earned him nasty look from the Yamanaka heiress. I'm afraid it won't be that simple, Shikamaru stated, closing his eyes and assuming a pensive position. Why's that? Kiba asked. How can I explain this? Naruto, about the seal you created. I was drunk. I didn't do it on purpose. He protested, knowing well that it was a lame excuse at best. I just want to know if you have any idea how it works, the Nara deadpanned. Well, it's obvious the idiot doesn't, Sasuke remarked, interrupting him. Hey, you wanna fight me? Naruto yelled, trying to move towards the Uchiha and shove his provocation where the sun didn't shine. A gentle squeeze, for Sakura's standards when she was angry, of the arms wrapped around his neck reminded Naruto that he had to behave. A not-so-gentle squeeze of chakra chains reminded Sasuke of the same thing. So? Shikamaru asked, apparently not bothered by such mistreatment happening right in front of his eyes. Do you? No. Naruto admitted. Almost everybody groaned in frustration. Akamaru whined, covering his eyes with his paws. Gaara just stood there, but one of his eyes developed a strange, almost unnoticeable tick. It was right then that the door swung open. A single Anbu, wearing a mask representing some kind of small bird. Naruto wasn't sure what kind of bird, though took a peek inside. Hi, is everything alright in here? The Anbu agent said. He looked somehow intimidated by being under everyone's scrutiny. Yeah, everything's fine, Naruto said, even if it should have been clear that it wasn't, restrained as he and Sasuke were. Because, me and the other Anbu around felt a big spike of chakra and killing intent, so, it's fine, man. For real, Naruto insisted. Oh, good, the Anbu said, nervously shifting his gaze from Sakura and Gaara, for some reason, and Naruto realized that Gaara was actually glaring at the masked shinobi. Strange. Well, then, carry on. The Anbu added before closing the door in a hurry. Since when Anbu were so emotional? Jiraiya ran under the thick canopy of the forest, the vegetation barely disturbed by his passage. Apparently Tsunade's skills had not rusted too much, since she had detected the presence of their two teammates even before she'd left the town. He wondered if this was just another sign of their guilt, but dismissed the thought. First, they had to capture her and take her back for interrogation. He and Orochimaru had separated, to approach her from two different directions at the same time. It shouldn't have taken too long, since Tsunade was slowed down by her own apprentice, who was way too young to be a real threat. Not to two of the Sannin. He felt a pang of nostalgia and strange foreboding. Would they still be the Sannin, if one of them had turned traitor? He snapped out of it when he realized that he had stepped on something, and there was a lot of smoke around his leg. Shit. A trap. An explosive note. It didn't matter. The Toad Sage leaped immediately, hoping to get away from the blast zone fast enough. Could it be possible that Tsunade had managed to cover her tracks? To his surprise, there was no boom. Maybe the trap was defective. Good for him. Jiraiya kept running. As the gallant Jiraiya disappeared in the thick woods, the great Gamatora groaned in pain. Slowly, he managed to lift himself up, but his mind was abuzz, trying to understand what had gone wrong. For one thing, he was not supposed to be trampled by one of the only two people that were capable of summoning him. But why had that happened? He had just reverse summoned himself to Jiraiya's position, and, I see, he said dramatically, even if nobody was around to hear him. I'm so used to spy work, that the instincts ingrained into me by all the rigorous training I underwent kicked in automatically and I immediately tried to hide. He sat down in a hopefully meditative-looking position, before continuing his monologue. Of course, not even Jiraiya, the sage of Mount Myaboku, could spot me. But how he didn't notice the smoke, that's beyond my knowledge. Focused on such important matters, the great Gamatora realized only 10 minutes later that he still had to give Minato's scroll to Jiraiya. Minato took a deep breath, looking at the folder sprawled on his desk. 19, one for each time traveler. Each folder was already considered an S-rank secret, on a need-to-know basis. How the group of shinobi had arrived in his time, however, that was even more classified. Better to avoid spreading that knowledge around. Explaining the details of the whole situation to the people was bound to be a headache, he was sure of it. There were also the pictures that had been taken during their captivity, which had led to a few, awkward ones. For example, the one of Naruto knocked out cold, drooling from one side of his mouth. The others were slightly better. The Yamanaka girl snarling. Chisa's boy eating chips, where he had found them. Minato was still not sure. Naruto's girlfriend, Sakura, in a coma, covered in seals and chakra restraints. Those were probably going to end up in the kid's family album somehow, he was sure of it. That's what happened when you lived in a village with ninja parents. The door opened slightly, and a Chunin peeked into his office. They've arrived, Hokage-sama. As you requested. Good, good. Send them in 2 minutes, he replied, as he started to organize the folders based on the guests that were to come in his office. For now, he didn't want to think about what to do with the Suna shinobi. It was not like he could go to the Kazekage and just tell him we have found 4 of your shinobi in the village. They're from the future, and 3 of them are your children. Oh, by the way, 1 is the next Kazekage. Yeah, that would go smoothly, for sure. Besides those, there were also the other 2 with no match at all in Konoha's data bank, Hozuki Suigetsu and Jugo, no family name given. He would have to ask their guests about them, maybe their relatives had moved to Konoha, or would move, from his perspective. Then there was this other girl, Uzumaki Karen. Uzumaki? How come he hadn't noticed that before? The only Uzumaki Minato had ever met was Kushina, and there were no other survivors. Naruto had been given the Uzumaki family name, for reasons Minato still hadn't asked to his son, because of all the pressing matters. So, was she? Quickly examining the folder, Minato noticed that the blood tests on this Karen girl had only been run against Kushina and not himself. They were related, but that didn't help him much. Did they have another kid? Minato could feel his head begin to spin. Wait. Hadn't Naruto said something about being their only child? He'd had the feeling that his son was hiding something, but not saying anything about a sister. Why would he do something like that? Had they fought? Were they on bad terms? And if that had happened, how could Kushina have allowed such a thing? With a click, the door opened, and people started to accumulate inside the office with polite salutes. Minato greeted them accordingly, making a note in the back of his head to speak with Naruto about this. Or with Karen. Or maybe just run another blood test to be sure. He turned his attention back to all the new arrivals. They were an odd group, that was for sure. Clan heads and heirs alike, one of the village's blacksmiths and a couple of Chunin that had recently married. They were on edge, probably thinking why such an unusual meeting was taking place. Minato was at the point of offering them the folders, when he realized that something was missing from the now really cramped room. He called for the Chunin that was on the verge of closing the door, and asked for more chairs. An awkward silence permeated the room once the bird-masked Anbu had left. The sudden intrusion had somehow settled everyone's spirits. Now was not the time for fighting, Naruto knew that. But he had no idea what to say to his companions. So, if Naruto doesn't know, how can we go back? Kiba asked. Well, Naruto said. There are way more seal masters now than back home, I mean, back in our time, so maybe they could help. You sure about this? Tenten asked dubiously. Yeah, my father, he said something along those lines. The deadpans on everyone's faces basically screamed how skeptical they were. Hey! I'm not lying. Naruto protested. Nobody is saying that, Naruto, but, Chuji grimaced, trying to find a good way to explain his, and everyone else's, point. But what? It's not like we can be sure about it, Shikamaru finished for his Akimichi friend's sake. You did this by accident, remember? Yeah, but, and you don't even remember what you did, Shikamaru continued, unabashed. That's true, but and you were drunk, Ino reminded him. Come on. Everyone was drunk. Naruto wailed. Nobody else was stupid enough to mess with seals. Karen accused. That's not. Listen, everyone. Lee shouted, jumping upright with his usual energy, and wobbling way less than a few minutes before. We must not waste our time accusing Naruto of having done something extremely unyouthful. Thank you. Naruto said, grateful for his friend's support. Because we already know he did. Lee continued, completely ignoring Naruto. But it doesn't matter that he's trapped us all in the past. Nor does it matter that he held his alcohol worse than myself. Oh, come on, bushy brows. He wailed. Nobody seemed to care. Lee probably hadn't realized that he was basically insulting Naruto. We should think of our course of action, here. We must trust Yondaime-sama and the other seal masters to find a solution, Lee proclaimed, finishing his attempt at a raising speech. What if they do not? Sai asked, unchanging his expression. Sai-kun, your timing is extremely unyouthful, Lee said, pouting at having seen his argument deflated even before he could add something about youth in there. Naruto? Shikamaru called, gaining the attention of his fellow shinobi. Do you have a plan or, don't look at me, Shikamaru. Naruto interrupted him. You're the genius at planning here. There was a pause as everyone looked to Shikamaru for an answer. Troublesome, why it's always me. I suppose that if they don't find a solution, we'll remain here, the Nara deadpanned. That's it? Naruto asked in shock. That's your plan? I can't travel through time, Naruto, Shikamaru said, slightly annoyed. But, remaining here. Ino said, worry evident in her voice, wouldn't that change things? It's too late to avoid that, the Nara declared. We've already changed things. We're changing things by just existing here. There was another silent pause as everyone in the room thought about how such an event would impact their lives. My mom wanted me to buy groceries after the party. Sakura whispered, staring into space. Naruto flinched. Look, let's not jump to conclusions. He said, trying to brighten the mood. I'm sure we'll find a way to go back. Databayo. Do we even want to go back to our time? Sasuke asked, speaking for the first time since the attempted brawl with Naruto. All eyes turned to stare at him. Chapter 13. Minato scanned the people sitting in his office. Seeing as his office was usually used to receive mission reports or mountains of paperwork, the place was normally void of any chairs, aside from the one reserved for the Hokage. But since this was an emergency, and he wanted to deal with it in a secure place, he had arranged to have some seats moved in from the other rooms of the tower. So here he was, the Yondaime Hokage, watching various people of various social standing attempting to sit on a seemingly random arrangement of chairs, stools, cushions and even an upside-down bucket, which of course led to some problems. As an Uchiha, the cushioned chair should belong to me, Fugaku, the head of the Uchiha clan, proclaimed quite dramatically just a few inches from Hayashi Hyuga's stoic face. I do not see how you being a member of your family would make you more eligible for the best seat, the pale-eyed shinobi replied. After all, I am from a prestigious family as well, of which you're the heir, while I am already clan head. So, the seat is mine. Minato managed to suppress a sigh. The rivalry between the two high-class clans was utterly ridiculous and it seemed to have started simply because they were the village's two most prestigious clans since the Senju's decline. That didn't mean that they didn't manage to find reasons for such a rivalry. And that would matter if this were an official meeting. But since this is an informal event inside the Hokage's office, being clan head does not give you the right to a better seat. My official position as both head of my clan and chief of the Uchiha military police force gives me a higher social standing than you, Hyuga-san. Which means that I can pick the seat I want when I'm not among my peers. Such arrogance. But that's what I should expect from a Uchiha. Am I right, Fugaku-san? We are a founding clan, Hayashi-san. Never forget that. Enough, Minato said firmly, interrupting the petty argument. Shikaku, you're going to sit on the cushioned chair. Everyone else, pick the closest seat you can find. We've wasted enough time already. The Nara just stared at him disbelief for a few seconds before huffing theatrically and doing as he was ordered. This gained him cold stares from the two men and grateful ones from their wives, who had been a little embarrassed to see their men acting like children in front of the Hokage and all the other people. Having resolved the seating problem, Minato briefly scanned the people in the room. It was a seemingly miscellaneous group of various social standings. Fugaku and Mikoto, sitting on a pair of stools from the mission assignment lounge. Hayashi and his wife Hanako, on a pair of chairs retrieved from the offices infested by clerical chunin. Shibi Aburame, sitting stoically on the bucket, a slight buzz humming beneath his coat. Tsum, trying to start a conversation with the other women in the room, and being disappointed at the lack of response. Shikaku looked mildly annoyed because he already knew what this was about. Chuza, confused and trying to fit on the tiny chair he had selected. Inoichi's sister Inoko, called here to fill in for her comatose brother. Minato would have preferred to avoid involving someone not directly related to the incident, but it was necessary to have the help of the Yamanaka clan, so he had opted for the next of kin to young Ino. Not including her mother, who had apparently not had any contact with Inoichi yet, as that seemed like a bad idea. All shinobi from prestigious clans, some more prestigious than others. Then there were Kizashi and Mabuki Haruno, a couple of newlywed chunin that would somehow manage to produce an S-rank kunoichi trained by Tsunade, of all people, who was also his son's girlfriend. Yeah, he didn't plan on explaining that last part. Let the youngsters handle that themselves. And finally there was Ken Hagane, a simple but skilled blacksmith, who was looking around the room with wide eyes, like he was asking himself what he was doing there. Are these guys all clan heads? Someone whispered, catching Minato's attention. It was Kizashi Haruno, who was almost as nervous as the only civilian present. Keep your voice down. We don't know why we're here. His wife replied in a hushed tone. They weren't the only ones, actually, and the yondaime was starting to think that his shinobi were just a bunch of gossipers, trained in assassination and stealth. But the Hokage sent for us hymns. If everyone is favorable, Minato said, interrupting the various discussions in the room, I would like to skip formalities and get straight to the point, Minato started, once everyone was seated. Everything that will be discussed in this room during this meeting is to be considered an S-rank secret. Is that clear? A stunned silence ensued as soon the yondaime mentioned the words, S-rank secret. S-rank secrets were no joke. It meant that the security of the whole village at least could be at risk if such information were divulged to the general public, let alone by Konoha's enemies. Everyone in the room besides Shikaku Nara and Shibi Aburame became instantly wary. Nervousness crept over their faces, as they considered the implications of such an important thing being announced without preamble during an informal meeting. Then suspicious looks started to be sent towards the two chunin and sole civilian in the room, especially the blacksmith, who did his best to not squirm under their relatively, and just below the acceptable level of decency, hostile looks. All in all, he did a good job. If this is about an S-rank secret that we must be made aware of, Hokage-sama, then why are they here? Fugaku asked with an indignant tone, gesturing towards the Haruno couple and the civilian. Mikoto sighed silently at her husband's social antics. Hey, we wouldn't be here if the Hokage hadn't called us. Mabuki protested vehemently. Just because we're not from a clan doesn't mean, silence, you. Enough, I said. Minato ordered, rising from his own seat. We don't have time to squabble. We muse, yes, Hagane-san. He sighed at the civilian's raised hand. Hokage-sama. Sir. Ken Hagane asked, quite nervously as he lowered his arm. I understand why you called your shinobi, but, why am I here? I'm not sure if I should be given such an honor, surely there was a mistake. No mistake. I called all you here for a reason, he said, looking everyone straight in the eyes. You are all aware of our guests, correct? Yes, the Uchiha clan head hissed, unconsciously massaging his still sore chest where he had been stabbed by his own son. Not that he knew that. Yet. Other similar responses were heard all over the room, albeit with different tones, ranging from confusion to realization. Besides Shikaku, who just rolled his eyes. The Nara probably just wanted to get the whole troublesome matter over with. Sorry for asking, but, what guests? Kizashi Haruno asked, raising his arm as well, like an academy student would. It gained him a light slap to the head from his wife. Silly man, Hokage-sama is talking about those intruders that were taken prisoner inside the village 2 days ago. Right? Prisoners? The blacksmith asked. I only know about an emergency evacuation, I had to leave my shop and follow those genin. A few snorts followed that statement. Apparently the man was not a person that listened to the rumor mill. I would like you all to please remember that Hagane-san is a civilian and, as such, is not quite as informed of village affairs. Scoffing at him for that reason is uncalled for, Minato said with a firm voice. He felt like he was scolding a class of children, sometimes. Then why is he here? Hayashi asked, narrowing his eyes. Because like all of us, he is involved, Minato said simply. How would we be involved with the prisoners? Besides the obvious confrontations we had with them, we didn't have a confrontation with the prisoners, Uchiha-san, and we are not the only ones here. The Haruno man half grumbled before being silenced by a glance from Minato. They're not prisoners anymore. When I asked if you were all aware of our guests, I mean exactly like that. What? The Uchiha asked, shock evident on his face. Similar reactions were visible from the other people in the room, as well. Except Shikaku and Shibi. Or maybe Shibi. Those sunglasses and coat gave him a perfect poker face. As I said, they're guests. They ceased being prisoners 2 days ago. Why did you think I was calling them that, Fugaku-san? I didn't think you meant it quite so literally, Fugaku grumbled. May we know for what reason you have pardoned all of these dangerous individuals after so little time for investigation, Hokage-sama? Thank you for asking, that's exactly why I called you all here. If you would examine the contents of these folders, he said, passing them out to the people cramped in his office, I think you may start to get a picture of the whole situation at hand. The room was silent except for the rustling of paper as the occupants began reading. Shikaku didn't even bother opening his folder as he watched the rest of them for their reactions. Shibi read his, probably out of curiosity to see what information they had on his son. Which was not much, actually. Shikaku was not disappointed as the blacksmith lost his composure first, his eyes jumping up sharply from the page to the Hokage. Is this some kind of joke? There was an amused snort from the other side of the room. Minato turned that way with a cold glare, only to see Tsum trying to contain her mirth. And I kicked him in the... In the end, the young Inuzuka leader lost it and exploded into a wild laugh. Huh, that's weird, Masahiro murmured from his spot on the hotel's roof, lounging in a beach chair. A long silence followed that statement, so he turned his head slightly towards his sister-turned-servant standing at attention to his right. Aren't you going to ask what is weird, my loyal minion? He really didn't need a minion, but he missed those glorious hours where he'd had dozens of Uchiha under his iron fist. So he had arranged an agreement with his sister Ayumi. She was basically his slave for a while, and in exchange he would not rat on her to their parents about her peculiar taste in literature. What's weird, Masa and I? She asked, rolling her eyes. Masahiro had had to compromise when the agreement was made. Nothing could convince Ayumi to call him Masahiro-sama, not even good old-fashioned blackmail. Apparently, something caused an uproar in both the Hokage Tower and in the hotel lounge, he said simply. The tower? Ayumi whispered in shock. Can you really sense people that far away? I was bored, so I checked in on how Hokage-sama's meeting was doing. That's not whatever. Can you hear what they're saying? Or what the guests are talking about? I'm a sensor, sis. I can feel people's chakra, not their voices. Oh. But I bet it's about something big, he said solemnly, passing her an empty glass. Now, go refill my iced coffee. The hotel lounge was in chaos. Everybody was talking, arguing, murmuring, shouting, yelling and screaming. With the exception of Shino, who was silent, and Shikamaru, who was massaging his temples. Everybody calmed down. Naruto shouted above the cacophony of voices. We don't really have to talk about this right now. Oh no, Naruto, we will talk about this right now. Sasuke said with a serious frown. You of all people should. Don't you dare say that, Sasuke. I'll say what needs to be said, idiot. The Uchiha retorted. Naruto, while I don't like it, Sasuke has made a valid point, the Kazekage said, interrupting another attempted brawl before it could start. Was he still the Kazekage since they were in the past now? Naruto inwardly wondered. Gaara. Naruto tried to protest. We can't tell them. Wait, the redhead interrupted, while turning his head slightly towards Hinata. Hyuga-san. Would you please check the room for hidden surveillance? Oh, of course. She answered meekly, activating her bloodline and scanning the whole room. And probably the area outside of it. And even further. It's clean. There are only the ANBU patrolling the hotel, a woman with very long hair in the kitchen and 2 Uchiha on the roof. Sasuke visibly flinched at that news. Good. They should not be able to hear us then, Gaara said calmly. Still, Naruto, don't try to avoid the topic, both of your parents are alive, was the reply from the sand user, whose gaze pinned Naruto to the spot. As are mine. And mine, Shikamaru said, not bothering to raise his head towards them. Mine as well, Ino added, shuddering at the thought of her own encounter with her father. So, we have to consider all the viable choices available to us, negating any may prove to create greater problems in the future, Gaara concluded. I suppose we could talk about it. But what choices do we have? We could seriously mess this all up. It's not like anyone else has any ideas on what to do, since this has never happened before, Sakura said, glaring at Naruto. We'll just have to figure it out on our own. It's not that easy, Sakura-chan. Well, who's the smartest among us? Kiba said, butting into the conversation. Every head in the room turned to a certain lazy young man, and he tried to pretend to not notice before sighing and standing up. Shikamaru stepped forward, muttering something that sounded suspiciously like troublesome before assuming his thinking pose. Alright, we all know how we got here, he began, so let's not waste any time talking about that. I do have a couple theories on the logistics of everything, but they're pretty complicated. He glanced around the room before sighing. I wish I had something right on, that might make it easier. Why don't we ask one of those ANBU to bring us a chalkboard or something, Kiba suggested. We could use the one in the hotel's bar, Hinata added. They use it to write the prices. Gaara raised one non-existent eyebrow before sending his sand forward and manipulating it into a large flat surface on the wall. After a brief moment of concentration, it condensed into a solid slab before nodding. Or Gaara could do that, Shikamaru deadpanned. That'll work. I cannot get you chalk, unfortunately. No need, Shikamaru replied, pulling a kunai out of his pouch as he began etching over the surface. Just erase when I ask, alright? The redhead nodded as everyone settled down in preparation to try and understand this complicated subject Shikamaru was going to try to explain. If he thought it was complicated, then it probably was. Scraping a single line across the surface, the Nara began speaking. Alright, so, this is the first theory, Theory A, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. This line is our original timeline. About halfway up that line, he made another line diverting from it at an angle, like a branch from a tree trunk. When we traveled back, we accidentally created another timeline different from our own to account for all the changes we've already made and will be making. Our timeline is unaffected, and still exists, we just have to figure out not only how to travel forward in time, but back to our now alternate reality future. That sounds simple enough, Chuji ventured uncertainly. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow, before turning back to the board and changing his two lines into a full-blown tree of diverting lines. Branches branching into branches and then even more branches until the whole top half looked nearly incomprehensible. It does until you consider that, theoretically, every choice anyone makes creates new realities depending on the different number of outcomes that single decision could have had. We're not just looking for our future, we're effectively searching for a needle in a haystack. It gets even more complicated after this, but you get the gist of it, right? Naruto's hand shot up. What's a timeline? Shikamaru blinked at his friend while almost everyone groaned. I'm not answering that, he said, ignoring Naruto's pouting frown. Now, for the second theory. Theory B, whatever, this is where things get complicated. How so? Shino quietly asked. Well, basically, if we alter anything here too severely, such as in a way where we aren't, or won't be, produced by our parents, we could cease to exist. I knew it. Naruto exploded, in a frightened tone. I knew that not telling them was a good idea. Naruto, calm down, Sakura huffed, grabbing him by the sleeve. Shikamaru, there is a flaw in that logic though. If one of us, or more, ceased to exist because they changed the circumstances that led to our own birth, how could those changes happen, since they never came back to make those changes? That's time travel for you, an incredibly illogical mess, Shikamaru smirked gravely. It could also mean that Theory A is more plausible though. What if it's not and this paradox happens? Temari asked, voicing everyone's question. Well, we may never know for certain but... Shikamaru hesitated, as he scratched his head. Either the timeline will ignore the paradox and the events keep going, altered by the absence of the person eliminated by the paradox, or... Sakura nudged him, preparing herself for the worst. Or it all goes horribly wrong, the Nara deadpanned. Could you tell us what you mean by that? Sasuke asked, scowling. There's no way to know for sure. Reality could change right in front of our eyes, leaving us unaffected. We could be stuck in a limbo, unable to interfere with the events of the timeline transpiring around us. We could be trapped in an infinite loop. Well, that all sounds bad, but reality as we know it could cease to exist. The fabric of time and space around us could become unstable and cause a rift. Alright, we got it, a paradox is a bad thing. Kiba yelled, having gone a little pale at Shikamaru's descriptions of possible scenarios. And those are just a few possible consequences of a paradox, but we're getting distracted, Shika continued. Signaling to Gaara to erase the sandboard surface, he started to carve a curved line into it. Let's move on to Theory C. All around them, there were leaves, bushes and trees, but they had no time to admire the beautiful forest. Tsunade and her apprentice were running high above the ground, jumping from one branch to another at almost top speed. Almost being the key word. Shizun was struggling to breath as she pushed herself to keep up with Tsunade's pace. The medic knew that the girl was getting tired, and their pursuers were getting closer and closer. Tsunade, Sama. I can't keep running. The girl gasped. If you have enough air to talk, you have enough to run. Move it. The slug summoner snapped, not letting go of the small hand. Inwardly she was worried. Whoever was chasing them was good. These were no average debt collectors. Someone must have seriously invested some cash into her capture. She reached back to shove the dark-haired child down just as a probably poisoned dart whizzed over it. Those bastards. When she got a hold of them she was going to break every bone in there. Her thought was cut off as she was once again forced to assist Shizun in dodging a barrage of shuriken and kunai before changing direction. They were hurting them somewhere, she could sense, but there wasn't much she could do to stop them. Chased by professionals, without support and with the last person she really cared about in danger. Things were not looking good. She heard something snap, just a little on the left behind her. The hand slipped away. She turned her head, only to see her young apprentice falling to the ground, following the branch that had broken under the girl's feet. Tsunade immediately leaped after her student, landing beside her. Shizun had managed to regain her footing almost immediately, but she was slumped, heaving for breath. Come on, she said, pulling up the younger Kunoichi by her arm. We don't have time to. A leap. A big figure landing right in front of her. An explosion of dead leaves, disturbed by the sudden movement. The last Senju widened her eyes in shock. Tsunadeheim, Jiraiya greeted her, his usual friendly visage morphed into a dark expression. It's been a while. Tsunade-sama, Shizun said, her tone disbelieving. It's, hello Tsunade, a cold voice she knew well said, interrupting her apprentice. She hadn't felt Orochimaru arrive behind her, having focused on Jiraiya's boisterous landing. The pale snake had just appeared there. Tsunade jerked back from Orochimaru's uncomfortable proximity, putting some distance between her and her ex-teammates. She kept Shizun behind her and tensed protectively, watching the two with keen eyes. What do you want? She asked, glaring angrily back at them. I thought I made it clear the last time to leave me alone. Jiraiya winced slightly, probably remembering about the last time, before his expression hardened again. Tsunade, why'd you do it? The blonde narrowed her eyes as she tried to figure out what exactly he was talking about. Who had she managed to piss off this time? Was it that spoiled little despot back in? No, probably not. That arrogant buffoon wouldn't have had the nerve to hire her old teammates to hunt her down. What the hell are you going on about, Jiraiya? I've done a lot of things, you're going to have to be specific. Please, Haim, don't put up a fight, Jiraiya sighed. You have nowhere to run anymore. He's right, Tsunade, Orochimaru said, with little regret in his voice. Just give up now. Give up. You were chasing me down like I was some random missing meme. What's gotten into you? Jiraiya's mouth went thin, and something in his eyes hardened. Please stop playing dumb, Tsunade. You can't lie your way out of this. Lie my way out of what? You attacked me. She pointed out. Tsunade was feeling her patience wearing thinner and thinner. Stop playing games. Orochimaru hissed. We know that you raised the invasion force that attacked Konoha. Konoha was, wait, Tsunade stopped. What did you say? A hard silence was the only answer she received. Tsunade evaluated Jiraiya's stance. He was hesitant, but only slightly. He was poised to strike at any moment, and he was watching her just as intensely as she was watching him. Tsunade took a step back, pushing Shizun further away. Orochimaru instead didn't move at all. He remained where he was, as if their encounter was just a meeting between old friends. Which it was, even if not as she would have imagined it. The only perceptible movement were his eyes. They lingered for a few seconds on Tsunade's apprentice. She could immediately feel Shizun's fearful grip about her arm tightened. There was no way the girl would survive a confrontation with her former teammates, if things got physical. Especially as exhausted as she was. I did not send an invasion force to the village, you idiots. Tsunade insisted firmly. I'm sorry, Haim, but we have proof. Proof good enough that Sarutobi-sensei and Minato both sent us here to capture you. Proof. Tsunade hissed in indignation. But that's impossible. One of the kunoichi that attacked Konoha was able to use the strength of 100, Orochimaru revealed in a deadpan tone. To say that Tsunade was speechless was an understatement. She ignored Shizen's gasp, her mind churning with questions. Questions that had no possible answer. That's impossible. I created that technique, and only I know. Exactly, Orochimaru said smugly. Tsunade really hated that smirk of his. You're coming with us, Haim, Jiraiya said with a tone of finality. The hell I will. Tsunade snapped. There was no way she would go back to that village, not after what had happened and especially not if someone had framed her, or worse, stolen her secret techniques and used them against the leaf. Oh, you will, Orochimaru said, narrowing his eyes. Because you'd never do anything to hurt Dan's precious little niece. At that, Tsunade tensed more and even Jiraiya went still. The medic knew that at this point a physical confrontation with both of her teammates was inevitable, but she also knew very well that her young apprentice would have a very slim chance of leaving such a fight unscathed. Not to mention the fact that the girl would put her at a huge disadvantage, trying to keep her from harm. She had to send her away, but how to do that without having one of the other Sannin catch her while Tsunade was fighting the other one? Tsunade saw only one way to do it. Shizun, can you make one last jump? She asked, not moving her gaze from her former teammates. The girl snapped out of her shock and looked up at her mentor, forgetting about Orochimaru's gaze for the moment. I think so, but... Good, then you can also land, Tsunade said as she unceremoniously grabbed the confused girl by the scruff of her kimono. Once you do, run the fastest you can away from here. Tsunade-sama. What are you? The girl's protests quickly morphed into a scream of terror as Tsunade made a half pirouette and threw Shizun with all her strength in a random direction. The young kunoichi soared, high and fast, until she disappeared above the forest's canopy. They could still hear her screams even after several seconds. As if the ceasing of Shizun's terrified howl was some sort of signal, Orochimaru sprang into action and leapt after Tsunade's apprentice, her last precious person. Big mistake. Tsunade was immediately in front of him, one blur against another. He saw the punch coming, Tsunade knew that, but Tsunade had a nice combination of speed, luck, element of surprise and most importantly, the fact that Orochimaru was running straight towards her. The connection was clean, and Orochimaru was sent crashing into the forest and through 1, 2, 3 trees before coming to a stop with a violent back-first impact with another tree trunk. Jiraiya winced. That's gonna hurt. Not as much as you'll hurt if you don't leave me alone, Tsunade growled, turning her attention toward him. Tsunade-Haim, please. I don't want to fight you, but you have to turn yourself in. If you don't come with us, then you'll be left with a kill on-sight decree. They can fucking try. I didn't do it, Jiraiya. I'm sorry, Haim, I really am, but in the end I am loyal to the Leaf. You may have reason to hate our village, but I have to stand against you because this time you've gone too far. No matter what I think of the Leaf, you've lost it if you think I'd send an invasion, you damn fools. You two of all people should know that. I'm a drunken gambler, not a terrorist. There's no room for argument, a voice said. Tsunade and Jiraiya looked up. It was Orochimaru coming out of the trees, a big bruise on his left cheek, his whole form covered in small cuts and twigs and his eyes promised death and retribution. You will come with us, or I will slit Shizun's throat, then drag you back with us. Well, that doesn't leave me a lot of choice, now does it, Orochimaru? Tsunade asked, dangerous steel coating her voice. All of them knew that the time for talking was over. For one last moment, they studied each other with cold, hardened gazes. Jiraiya nodded imperceptibly at Orochimaru. Tsunade closed her right fist, her knuckles being the only sound in the forest. The other two Sannin moved, a swirl of dead leaves rising into the air. The legendary kunoichi slammed her clenched fist into the ground. And this takes us to the fifth theory, the Nara said, moving the chalk over the flat surface. Basically, the idea is that the timeline is already overriding itself, deleting the future and creating a new timeline, rendering travel back to the original point impossible. Stop. Please, Shikaku, stop, Minato said, massaging his temples. But we haven't even started on the theory that is based on the idea that, without their time travel, Things would have gone differently and that their time travel won't change anything at all, Shikaku protested. I just asked you to explain how time travel is possible, not how it doesn't make sense, Minato said, gesturing towards the chalkboard full of notes and chalk lines. He had asked the ANBU guards to bring it into his office when Shikaku had offered to explain the whole mess they were in. Hayashi folded his hands neatly over the folder in his lap. While these are certainly interesting theories, they are just that, theories. We came here for facts, not wild tales of time travel and children from the future. Indeed, Hokage-sama. Even if these blood tests were correct, which I doubt, Fugaku added, reluctantly supporting the Hyuga's statement, it is more likely they found some technique to trick the test than for this all to be accurate. They attacked us. This boy you say is my son was the very one who nearly killed me. Uchiha-san may be, partially right, Hokage-sama, Inoko Yamanaka said, glancing above her own folder. One of these individuals, whoever they are, put my brother and my clansmen in a coma. It's clear that they're dangerous. And you say that one of them is Inoichi's daughter? She paused for emphasis. Forgive me if I find that just a little absurd, even for our world. Around them, a few other heads nodded and a few whispers were passed. Shikaku sighed, but made no effort to argue as he took a seat and let the yondaime deal with it. A slight humming could be heard from Shibi as his hive reacted to his irritation, but he also waited for their leader's input. Minato suppressed the urge to grimace. There are several other indicators, namely the bloodline limits and use of secret clan techniques, he tried. Not to mention the interviews Shikaku, Shibi and I, myself, have conducted. Why were we not offered the opportunity to interview them? Fugaku interrupted. If these are truly future members of our clans, with access to our secrets, surely this would have fallen under the jurisdiction of the clan heads. As much as I hate their arrogant whining, some put in, they kind of have a point. Not that I'm not willing to believe the whole from the future thing, I just find it suspicious that we weren't involved in the investigation. Not all of you are clan heads, Sum-san. But we are, supposedly, their parents, she countered. Which would make him part of my pack. I don't like being left out of matters that concern my pack. I imagine the others feel the same. That is why we're having this meeting, the yondaime replied curtly. I wanted to be sure before I brought our suspicions to light, and hopefully prepare you to meet with them. The various shinobi, and civilian, exchanged glances, before starting to discuss the meeting with the time travelers. Minato suppressed a sigh. Not quite what he had planned, but this worked too. If I didn't know better, I would say that someone had set these two groups up with the same choreography, Masahiro said, softly inhaling the aroma of his fresh cup of coffee. And by that you mean? His sister/minion asked, with a monotone expression. Truly an Uchiha, Mom would have been proud. I mean that besides a few little differences, like the number of people, they're basically doing the same thing and having similar moods, he clarified, taking a sip before grimacing at the bitter taste. Ugh. Pervy shrimp, you forgot the sugar. I did not. Ayumi protested loudly, perfect clan demeanor apparently forgotten. You just didn't stir it up first. Oh, I see. You're right, he admitted, closing his eyes to concentrate again on the two meetings. The newcomers hadn't caused any trouble, at least in the last 2 days, so he really didn't understand why he was sent to keep an eye, metaphorically speaking, on their actual prison. Fugaku probably wanted to punish him. Poor fool. Aren't you going to stir it up now that you know that, Masa and I? Maybe later. No wait, I changed my mind. Would you stir it up for me? He asked, offering the cup to her. His concentration was broken by the sound of cracking knuckles. It seemed he had gone too far. And that's why, if Theory F proves to be true, every change done in the past would change the future, our own past and present, and our memories would be overwritten, following the new chain of events that was started by the change in the timeline. Shikamaru's audience were staring at him blankly, now, some rubbed their temples, others pinched the bridges of their noses, and a select few looked as though they were trying to find their happy place. That's scary, Karen said, looking simultaneously haunted and bewildered. Wouldn't we notice this? We wouldn't have any idea anything was different, since for us, that change would be what actually happened. In other words, it would change not only that reality, but our memories, too. You do realize that this is not getting us anywhere, right? Sai asked with a straight face. A chorus of nods followed. Also, nothing in your explanation so far has really answered my question, Sasuke said bitterly, arms folded and his trademark scowl in place. Sasuke, Shikamaru started slowly, I don't think you realize that we have no idea of what consequences there could be because of our presence here. For now, it's better we don't cause any changes. At least until we know if we can go back or not, Sakura added as a reminder. Everybody looked at Sakura, some among them with wide eyes and expressions of horror, in silence. What? We're not sure we can go back yet. She said quickly, eager to break through the awkward tension. She winced when that resulted in most of the group scowling towards Naruto. I said I'm sorry. The blonde protested, before resigning to his fate. They would never let him live it down. So, yeah, we must wait until we know more before even contemplating going back or not. Especially until we know if it's actually possible, Shikamaru continued, bringing the discussion back on topic. Until then, we should try and avoid revealing too much to the past people, Sakura agreed, continuing Shikamaru's point enthusiastically, before freezing up. Wait a minute. Everyone's attention was focused on her, but she didn't seem to notice. Instead, she was standing still, unmoving and pale. All the time travelers waited for her words, but none came. Sakura-chan. Are you alright? Naruto asked as her eyes widened. He waved his hand in front of her, starting to feeling worried. Sakura-chan. Hello, Naruto? She asked, shakily. Yeah. He blinked. Promise you won't get mad? She squeaked. Sure. What's wrong? He asked quickly. He hadn't seen her so scared since the end of the war. And she had never squeaked. Ever. When I was fighting against your mother. I may have told her that she was supposed to be dead. Inside the hotel's kitchen, Kushina was pondering about the latest few days' events, as she searched for an orange juicer. She sighed exasperatedly as she cut a lemon in two. It frankly felt like a month had passed, rather than 3 days. After all, a rogue building materialized in the middle of the village, which only contained a few time travelers, one of whom was only her unborn son, who could be in her womb right at that moment after what happened after Minato's proposal. She should ask him his birthday, and another of whom was only his girlfriend. Kushina had met the girlfriend of her unborn son without even having given birth yet. And she'd fought against her, too. A long 3 days indeed. Kushina had to admit it, Pinky really had a mean punch. Though that was to be expected, considering that Tsunade, or someone else who had learned the Sanin's trademark technique, what was the name of Tsunade's apprentice again, trained her, or will train her. She also had a strong personality, from what she had seen in the cell. Or during their fight. True, they hadn't spoken much but, Kushina stopped in her tracks, her brows arched as she assumed a pensive expression. MMH. I think I'm forgetting something important, she frowned, as she let go of the blade. It was something that Pinky had said during the fight but for the life of her, Kushina was not able to remember it. She had been too angry during the battle and what happened immediately after had distracted her completely. Meh, must not be that important if I can't remember it. She finally chirped, starting to squeeze the lemon and pondering how much sugar should she use. A mighty cry resounded through the forest, startling birds from their perches and causing other such wildlife to skitter off in alarm. Then came the shockwave. The ground exploded, changing the landscape forever, because Tsunade Senju had decided to get serious. Her fight against her former teammates so far had been a long chase. She had kept them at bay by smashing stuff while they attacked her from a relatively safe distance, using many jutsu from their repertoire. Once in a while Orochimaru had tried to make a run for it, probably to try and find Shizune. But Tsunade had managed to dissuade him by hurling rocks and fallen trees at him. It had worked, so far. When the next travelers passed by, instead of a forest, they would find a small series of diminutive valleys and crevices, several unrooted trees and probably 1 or 2 of Jiraiya's trademark swamps. You just had to threaten her apprentice, didn't you? Jiraiya grumbled, giving his old friend an annoyed look. It's still more than you have done so far, Jiraiya, Orochimaru hissed, as he dodged another tree trunk that kept flying after passing them before eventually coming to a stop. Do you see her? Jiraiya asked as he peeked from his cover, ignoring the other man's taunt. Tsunade had been switching to hit-and-run tactics, which were really effective when the hits had the same destructive strength as a pile of explosive notes. She is hiding again. Smart on her part, but we'll have to lure her out. Not that simple. She has been doing a damn good job at keeping us at bay. We will take her down eventually. It's two of us against her, Orochimaru said. And her condition limits her actions on the battlefield. Her condition? You mean? We're not using that against her. Jiraiya scowled. Like you said, we have the upper hand, we don't need to resort to such a tactic. Orochimaru snorted derisively. We are shinobi, Jiraiya, we will use any advantage presented to us. Besides, we need to take her down quickly before this fight moves to a more crowded location. Not to mention, the faster we disable her, the less likely she will be injured. I thought you cared about taking her in alive. The Toad Sage scowled in the face of the snake's slimy logic. He hated when that bastard was right. Still, he was reluctant to admit it. Of course, if you've changed your mind, the pale Sannin continued with a smirk, I've got a collection of new poisons I've wanted to test that could. Okay, damn it. We'll use the other plan. You and your experiments, the white-haired man muttered with a shudder. His teammate smiled in smug satisfaction. Excellent. It's good to see you actually do have a brain under all that hair. Now, we need to flush her out so we can get close. Jiraiya grunted as he bit his own thumb hard enough to draw blood. Orochimaru did the same, and they both started to make the hand seals in almost sync, slamming the palm to the ground in the end with a simultaneous Kuchiyos no Jutsu. The familiar smoke appeared and dissipated rather quickly, and around the two Sannin now stood 4 toads and snake warriors, on their guards. Or slithered, in the snake's case. They knew that Tsunade had probably seen the smoke but it didn't matter. She was unable to summon on her own, not since her brother's demise that left her unable to withstand the sight of blood, and they had just quadrupled their numbers. There was no need to call the boss summons, especially since they needed her alive. Alright, listen up. We have to capture an S-rank target, and we have to do it smart. We need her alive, since she is our only link to a group of unknown shinobi that attacked the leaf. Jiraiya-sama? Who is the target? The slimmer toad asked. Tsunade Senju, the sage told them with a grim voice. The summons flinched, stunned for a few seconds from this grave news. Being seasoned fighters of their respective families, though, they remained calm and collected. Which was fairly easy since they were all cold-blooded. How can we assist you, Orochimaru-sama? A one-eyed snake asked, bowing slightly. Advance at her flanks, cut off any possible escape routes and don't give her any time to use her brutish strength to put us off balance. Jiraiya nodded, approving his friend's plan. All the toads imitated him, acknowledging their summoner's agreement. We need to flush her out first, though. Do I have to do all the work here, Jiraiya? Think of something. Fine, the taller man sighed before turning towards his toads. I'm going to need some oil, Gamachuro. Said Toad, the biggest among his summoned brethren, grinned as he took a step back and prepared himself, shifting his legs for more stability. The great amphibian drew in air, his chest swelling as it filled up his lungs. After a moment of preparation, the toad looked towards Jiraiya, his cheeks swollen in a grotesque way. The toad summoner pointed towards Tsunade's last known position, 50 feet or so in front of their cover. Gamachuro nodded and pointed his head towards the skies, spitting a glob of toad oil bigger than the average human adult, which soared high, as if thrown by a siege engine. As the oil began its descent, Jiraiya sped up his hands and inhaled before finishing the jutsu, unleashing a single fireball. Bright as a flare, it soared after the airborne mass of oil, piercing through it in an instant and spraying molten fire in every direction far across the forest. The two Sannin felt the temperature rising even from their position as they watched the trees being consumed. Even the ground was on fire, the oil burning slowly and sizzling. For a long moment, nothing seemed to happen, then a loud thunder broke the spell. Dirt and rocks were torn apart, creating a hole in the raging inferno as the oil fueling it was disrupted in such a violent manner. The figure of Tsunade leaped through it, still able to fight and barely singed, her clothes being the only thing that had sustained damage. Jiraiya was not sure if he should be grateful or not for the view. Without saying a word, the two still loyal Sannin moved toward her, followed by their summons, the toads brandishing their weapons and the snakes hissing, coiling in preparation to strike. Jiraiya signed to Orochimaru to flank her from the sides as he kept a direct approach. As the snake summoner gave him the confirmation signal, he raced towards the lonely medic, an attack pattern already forming in his mind. The toads would distract her, keeping her on her toes, and then he would. Why was she smiling? Jiraiya saw her chest rise, as if she were taking a deep breath. Then Tsunade opened her mouth and a thick, purple mist erupted from it. Jiraiya skid to a halt, and so did Orochimaru. They both knew how deadly the advancing fog was. Most of their summons were able to stop too, but not all of them. The cloud engulfed them as their momentum carried them forward, and Jiraiya heard the typical sound of a summon dispelling itself, the puff of smoke concealed by the purple fog. The poisonous mist kept expanding and he was forced to jump back quickly to avoid inhaling the toxic fumes. Orochimaru had been forced to retreat as well, and now the two of them were at a fair distance from each other as a result. He was moving to regroup with the other Sannin, when the mist grew in size even more. It felt like the gas released by Tsunade was following him specifically though, reaching its smoky tendrils towards him. With a curse, Jiraiya leaped further back over the devastated battlefield, losing sight of his comrade completely. It was then that the cloud in front of him exploded, revealing a charging Tsunade, fist ready, with a fierce grin on her face. Had she held her breath inside the mist? It didn't matter how she'd done to do it though. Tsunade had managed to play him, and he had fallen right into her trap. There was little chance to avoid that freakish punch of hers, but maybe if he... A puff of smoke appeared exactly between the two of them. Normal smoke, instead of the toxic kind created by Tsunade. I am the great Gamatora. A familiar voice yelled. And lo and behold, one of Jiraiya's favorite spy toads was there, right between him and Tsunade, looking as if he were trying to jump towards him. Jiraiya was baffled, as was Tsunade, if her widening eyes were any clue. It wasn't exactly what he had hoped for, but a distraction was a distraction. Exploiting the maybe half a second that the toad had gained for him, Jiraiya used the oldest trick in the taijutsu book. He sidestepped, allowing the fist to pass just inches from his face. The small toad was not so lucky, however, and was sent flying away with a squeak. Are you using your summons as shields now, Jiraiya? Tsunade snarled. How the mighty have fallen. The toad sage didn't reply. Instead, he quickly formed the necessary seals for another jutsu. His hair grew in an instant, hardening and encasing his body in the protective shroud known as Needle Jizo. Tsunade kept yelling and daring him to show his ugly face, but he ignored her. He had to think. Why had Gamatora arrived with a reverse summoning? Had something happened and he was acting as a messenger? Once Tsunade was subdued, he would have to look for the toad. Not leaving the safety of his mane, Jiraiya began throwing his chakra-hardened hair like a storm of needles. He just hoped that Orochimaru didn't take too long to find them. You told my mom she was going to die, Naruto said in a daze. I did, but... You told my mom she was going to die. He repeated a little louder, oblivious to everyone in the room looking at the pair with varying degrees of interest. Look, I'm sorry. Sakura said, raising her hands in an apologetic gesture. I was just surprised to see her and... Well, of course you were. Naruto told her as he started to pace, unable to stay still. Heck, I was surprised to see her. But why did you have to tell her that she died, will die in the future? It wasn't like I knew that we'd come back in time, Naruto. Sakura protested. Well, you should have. He replied, stopping right in front of her. Sure, because if your deceased mother attacks me, the first thing to pop into my mind will be, time travel. Considering what happened before the war, you could have figured out that something strange was going on. What happened before the war? Shikamaru asked, raising an eyebrow. Everyone else was sharing his confusion but decided to not interrupt the show. Nothing, they said at the same time without looking at him. The situation was already complicated without going into the little trip to that parallel world. Or about the parallel versions of almost everyone that was in the room. It was then that Chuji started passing around snacks, so that the other time travelers could enjoy the show. Not that the couple noticed. Not to get off topic, but can we get back on topic? Shikamaru asked dryly, sending a disapproving look to his teammate. No. Don't you understand how disastrous this is? Naruto replied as he began to pace again, his mind going back to the immediate issue at hand. She knew. She knew. And if she knew, then his father knew as well. That ruined all his plans. What was he? How was he going to? Wait a second. If she knows, why didn't she say anything? Maybe she doesn't want to know what happened. Or will happen. Maybe Uzumaki-san just forgot. Hinata chimed in, trying to calm the panicking blonde down. Because of everything that has happened. I wish it was so easy, Naruto wailed. She is an awesome kick-ass kunoichi. There is no way she'd forget such a thing, right? Naruto, you forgot half of the stuff you learned at the academy, Sasuke scoffed. Say what? That's not true, says the guy that had to learn Kage Bunshin because he couldn't form a single normal clone. That's just proof of how awesome I am. If you're that awesome, how come you're still a genin? Shock dawned on Naruto's face, before turning into a scowl. Well, who cares about that? I don't need to become a chunin to become Hokage. But now, you're not even going to become Hokage, because you've launched us into the past. Well, you'll never be a jounin either. Even Sakura-chan outranks you now. Don't involve me in your petty bickering, Naruto. Sakura protested, before blinking in realization. Wait, what do you mean by even? Bet you're regretting calling her useless, Naruto. Sasuke. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had grabbed each other's collar, faces so close that their noses were almost touching. You know, I've always regretted not punching you harder all those years ago. Now I know why. Ha! Sasuke sneered. You think you're actually stronger than me now? Who's the one that kicked your ass, huh? You and I remember that fight differently. They both clenched their free hands, forming fists and pulling back to sock each other in the jaw. Their punches never made contact, as they both felt their arms being restrained. Not again, you two. This is neither the time nor place, Sakura said flatly, tightening her grip on Naruto's wrist. Karen nodded in agreement from her seat, chakra chains protruding from her back and binding Sasuke's hand. You're right, Sasuke sighed while Naruto grunted. We'd better think about. The door suddenly burst open, startling everyone as an oblivious redhead waltzed into the room and set a large tray of glasses on the dresser. I made lemonade for everyone, Dadaba. Silence filled the room as Kushina Uzumaki registered the presence of the chakra chain and of the person it was attached to. Naruto was holding his breath, not sure what he should do. Unbeknownst to them, Shikamaru tried to cover the most he could of the sandboard with his own body, seeing that she was distracted, so that she would not see the various notes on its surface. Gaara helped him, shifting the sand grains that composed it and turning the notes in various games of tic-tac-toe. Crisis averted. Most of the others though kept passing the snacks Chuji was seemingly producing out of nowhere. Sai, on the other hand, was quietly passing the lemonade around. Where does he even keep them? Kiba whispered, indicating the Akimichi as he opened a small-sized pack of potato chips. It's a secret jutsu of his clan, Ino replied. Now shut up, I want to see what happens next. Naruto ignored his friend's commentary. He was too focused on his mother to care. Kushina's stare was frantically moving from Naruto to Karen and the chakra chains that were clearly visible. And each time, her expression changed. From shock to curiosity to brightening up in realization. Then a full grin was plastered on her face and before anyone could react, Karen found herself wrapped by Kushina's chakra chains and pulled into a pincer-like hug. Sasuke squawked as Karen's chakra chain yanked him along. What's your name? Mine is Kushina. Oh wait, you probably know that already, wait a second, she stopped, turning towards the only other Uzumaki in the room. Naruto, didn't you tell me you were my only child? I am your only child, Mom, Naruto managed to mumble without taking his eyes away from the scene. Are you sure? His mother asked arching an eyebrow. Yes, I'm sure, he replied firmly. Then how do you explain her? She asked, shoving the poor girl towards him a little with her chains, which Sasuke had to follow as well, as he tried to squirm away from Karen's own chakra restraints. Can you please let me go? Karen protested weakly, trying to free herself from the crazy woman that was basically holding her hostage. That's just Karen, Naruto said, like that explained everything. What do you mean, just? Karen roared in outrage. Ooh, that's a very nice name. Kushina said, perking up. Naruto, you shouldn't talk to your sister like that. Sister. Karen and Naruto yelled loudly, their confused expressions mirroring each other. For a couple seconds Naruto remained slack-jawed in shock, before the giggles and smirks from his companions, but especially Kiba's loud laughing, snapped him out of it. Traitors. At least Hinata had the decency to cover her smile. What? I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, trying to use the last line of defense he had, denial. Well, if you're an only child, how do you explain her? His mother asked with an annoyed expression. She's, he murmured, glancing at Sasuke for help. The last Uchiha, or not so last, now that they were in the past, just stared blankly at him, like it was not his problem. Traitor. Naruto had no idea what to say, because he was sure that he would screw up if he said anything, but he would also screw up if he didn't say something. He couldn't explain Karen because he really didn't know himself. They knew they were related but they hadn't been able to find out how. A little because of all that had to be done after the war and a little because they just couldn't find any records about their extended family. Between the destruction of Uzushiogakure and pain leveling Konoha, there was not much left. What was he supposed to say? The door opened again, slowly this time, almost in a meek way, attracting everyone's attention at once. An ANBU mask peeked inside the room, remaining silent for a moment. Naruto almost did a double take when he recognized the mask. It was the bedpan guy. What was he? Forgive the intrusion, PRI guests. And Uzumaki-san. But Hokage-sama is asking for all of your presences. Naruto had never felt so relieved to be called to the Hokage's office in his life. Still inside the dark cover of his mane, Jiraiya shot another barrage of hair as he heard Tsunade's rapid pace, stopping only when he was sure that she backed off to avoid being turned into a pincushion. Where the hell was Orochimaru? His eyes widened in shock as he suddenly felt an enormous chakra outburst. He knew what it meant, he had to move. He unwrapped his hardened hair and jumped away just in time before the earth where he had been standing exploded, Tsunade proudly standing in the middle of it. It seemed that in the end, the constant volley of needle-like hair was not enough to keep her at bay anymore. So much for gaining time. As he landed assuming a fighting position, Jiraiya examined Tsunade, noticing how a black line pattern was spreading from the seal on her forehead. Well, shit. Seeing Tsunade unleashing her seal was never good news for the enemy, or peepers, and the killing intent that she was releasing would have probably given most civilians a heart attack. Or at least Jiraiya thought so, having been subjected to way too many friendly beatings in his lifetime. But there was nothing friendly here. For a second he thought to summon Ma and Pa to enter Sage mode, but he dismissed it. He had to capture her, not kill her. And more importantly, there was no way in hell that he would let Tsunade see him looking like a toad. Jiraiya grinned as he shifted his position into an advanced taijutsu stance, left hand outstretched towards her. He flexed his fingers, as if to invite her to attack first. She cocked her head a little, before charging towards him. Orochimaru had better come help him, fast. Tsunade lunged for him. Kawarimi. A poor innocent log exploded into splinters. Tsunade turned with a roundhouse kick. Jiraiya barely dodged and immediately moved inside her guard. 1-2 on the ribs. Knee in her stomach. Feel sorry later. Kawarimi again, a rock was pulverized by Tsunade's swat. He landed a few meters away. She immediately turned to face him. Ram. Horse. Snake. Dragon. Rat. Ox. Tiger. The vaguely dragon-shaped stream of fire roared toward Tsunade. Now as she dodged, Tsunade leaped through the fire. Jiraiya could hear the sound of the flames engulfing her clothes and skin. He didn't see the punch that hit him. He just felt it and a split second later he was landing on the now barren ground. Hard. Jiraiya immediately regretted not using Sage mode as he bounced a few more times before managing to stop himself. Everything was hurting, but he managed to stand up in short time. Both he and his teammates had had worse in the past. Tsunade was still moving towards him, almost running actually, her wounds from Jiraiya's fire jutsu already regenerating, unlike her damaged clothes. A small, very small part of Jiraiya's mind was able to process the irony about how he was not enjoying the sight of a barely decently covered Tsunade rushing in his direction, but he ignored it. It may have been because of her livid glare, the snarl, the patches of still burned skin or the fact that she was forming hand seals to throw a jutsu. He braced himself, preparing to either retreat or attack based on what the medic-turned-killing machine had in store for him. Kuchios! Yelled a familiar voice, and Jiraiya had to protect his eyes with his arm as a column of dust boiled into the air a few meters besides him. The ground shook as an immense body materialized, a tail soaring towards Tsunade, swapping her away like she was a mere fly. And then there was a huge purple snake towering over both Sannin, flicking its long blue tongue. Manda! Jiraiya exclaimed, recognizing the boss summon instantly. Exactly, Orochimaru exclaimed, perched from the top of the snake's head. I decided that it's time to put an end to this, Jiraiya. I can't believe you summoned me just for this, Orochimaru, Manda said, hissing. You had better find a suitable sacrifice for me. Of course, my old friend. Just be patient, Orochimaru replied before turning his attention towards the legendary medic, that had taken little or no damage from the beast's attack thanks to her enhanced regeneration. Hey, Tsunade. Are you sure you don't want to surrender? Screw you both. Tsunade screamed at the top of her lungs. Oh. I'm sure Jiraiya would be interested. But tell me, Tsunade, wouldn't you surrender even for her? He asked, retrieving something from behind him. Both Jiraiya and Tsunade's eyes widened in surprise and shock respectively when they saw the young Shizun in Orochimaru's hands, apparently unconscious. But how did you? Do you remember what I told you before, right? If you wouldn't surrender. Orochimaru reminded her, his mouth now forming his creepy grin. You bastard. Tsunade yelled, sunshining towards the giant snake. Jiraiya immediately went after her, not exactly sure if he wanted to stop Tsunade or Orochimaru. Manda threw himself toward Tsunade, and Jiraiya, his mouth wide open, trying to swallow her. She leaped above the cavernous mouth, landing on the beast's head instead. Jiraiya would have followed her but had to evade Manda's enormous body that was advancing towards him because of his own momentum before moving behind her. His eyes widened. He would never make it in time. Die, you snake freak. She screamed, a fist ready to strike. Orochimaru just kept smiling, still holding Shizun in his right hand. Then in a blink of an eye Shizun changed, like she was made of vapor and a kunai was in Orochimaru's grip. Jiraiya arrived on Manda's head, a hand outstretched, a Rasengan already forming in the other and the decision of his life in front of him. Then Orochimaru planted his kunai in his own left hand, spilling blood everywhere. He was still smiling as he did it. Tsunade immediately lost her fierce standing, as he kept moving towards Orochimaru with a horrified expression as she tried to stop herself. Orochimaru pried the kunai out of his hand and slammed the bloody palm on the woman's face. Tsunade's body immediately fell limp, landing on her knees. She didn't move, eyes staring into nothing. Jiraiya dismissed the Rasengan and slowly moved to check on her, while Orochimaru just stared at her with contempt. Seems summoning you was not really necessary, Manda, he said, apparently uncaring for his self-inflicted injury. We should have just smeared her with blood from the beginning. Don't think you can escape paying me my just reward, Orochimaru. The giant snake grumbled, not caring if he had actually helped in a fight or not. Yes, the snake Sannin sighed as he retrieved some bandages from his vest. Don't worry about that, Manda. Just give me enough time to finish the village's business here. Orochimaru, what did you do? Jiraiya asked while binding Tsunade's arms and legs. She was not only in shock because of her hemophobia, but the seal's chakra was probably almost depleted, so there was no way for her to escape until they were back in Konoha. You really didn't notice? Orochimaru sneered, bandaging his hand. I just used a minor genjutsu to make a kunai look like her apprentice. She was so enraged that she immediately charged me, like I had planned. We could have won without you having to injure your hand to such a degree, Jiraiya rebutted, knowing it was a lost cause. Too late for that. The result justifies the means, and our mission is now complete. What about Shizun? Jiraiya asked. We should find her as well, Anne. There was a poof of smoke and the two still standing Sannin immediately stiffened, ready for a fight, before the smoke dispersed revealing a small toad. A very, very bruised small toad. Gamatora? Jiraiya asked, almost not recognizing the diminutive spy toad. What? Is that one of your toads, Jiraiya? Get off my head, you damn amphibian. Manda protested, shaking his head vehemently, trying to fling the newcomer off. Of course, Orochimaru and Jiraiya just used their chakra to remain attached to the giant snake. Tsunade was another story though, and the toad sage had to jump after her to keep her from sliding off the reptile. Oichai, Jiraiya, the small toad said as he jumped on the man's shoulder. I've got a message from that Minato brat. Tell him to not call me ever again for any not spy-related work. Got that? Before he could protest or ask for an explanation, Gamatora shoved a scroll in his hands and dispelled himself. What was that about? Orochimaru asked idly, barely interested in whatever happened between Jiraiya and his summons. "Let's see," he said, opening the scroll and reading it. It was Minato's calligraphy and it had been clearly written in a haste. "New intelligence found, Tsunade is not a traitor. Come back to Konoha ASAP. For 5 minutes, neither of the two said anything. They were too busy being at a loss for words. Finally, their gaze shifted towards the form of Tsunade, who was still having a panic attack and probably some very, very nasty flashbacks. "What do we do now?" Jiraiya asked, almost pleading. "You could start by reminding Orochimaru about the sacrifices he owes me," Manda deadpanned. That's it for part 5. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.